I am a provincial soldier. Provincials like myself will leave our homes, leave our colonies, to come here and not only help bolster His Majesty's ranks, make his army look that much bigger, but we're sought after. You see, even long before the United States came to be, the people that lived here within the colonies were known for their dedication, their strong work ethic, right? And our trades. We were good at what we did. Many were carpenters, shipbuilders, wagoners, tailors, coopers, cobblers, cordwainers, you name it, we did it. Basically, if you have a large military force moving to and fro throughout the countryside, it's like a large city. And I know you're sick of hearing this word, but we were essential, right? And we had to follow this army to keep those gears of this war machine moving forward. Now, as a provincial, you know, you got to wonder why the heck I want to come here. You folks have seen what it's like outside of here. Holy cow, this is no man's land, right? Who the heck in the right mind wants to come to this godforsaken hole in the woods and fight somebody else's war? Not me. But you know, when the king's offering me 20 cents a day in a land grant, it's awful hard to pass up. And let's keep in mind that about 75% of the provincial forces were made up of young men between the ages of 16 and 24 years of age. These young men growing up needing that chunk of land, you know, to lay the foundation for their lives. And that 20 cents a day is a good sum of money. Many of them had grown up in these small towns and communities, bartering and trading with their neighbors and loved ones for the things they need to get through life, you know, so they didn't even really have a concept of what good hard currency was because they'd never really had it. But now they're going to have money and they're going to have land and everybody's going to live happily ever after if we survive. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the British Redcoat, or regular as we like to call them. These regular troops come from all walks of life as well. Some are lifelong soldiers that are basically born into it. Their families, their fathers being soldiers before them. Others were actually successful businessmen at one point in time. But you see, at this point in time, over in England, they're kind of going through a slight recession. They had just fought 2 wars, which were quite costly. The wars for Spanish and Austrian succession. These wars, putting England in a recession, means simply that jobs are being lost, businesses and shops are being closed, and because of this, you've got people looking for work. Sounds familiar, huh? These men will join His Majesty's army. They feel that now they will have a little bit of financial stability, a sense of security for their loved ones and their families back home. Things will be good. Others are actually prisoners of war from the past wars, of Dutch and German descent and so on, that'll actually help make up the ranks of some of His Majesty's forces, and others are actually prisoners. You know, the King has opened up the jails of Ireland, Scotland, and England, offering freedom to those that will come here and fight this war in its entirety. And if they live, they're pardoned for any of their wrongdoings. Now, the British Redcoat will come here, and as an army, they show up on the shores of North America, and you know, they're bringing recruiters along with them too. Nearly 11,000 provincial men will take up arms in His Majesty's army, fighting for the British crown. But they're not going to fool me. They're not going to pull me into the ranks of their army. Those red-coated rascals only get paid 8 cents a day. You think I want that? Heck no. Many a men will take them up on that offer simply because of the glory of fighting for His Majesty. But not me. 8 cents a day? Come on. And they're even being taxed on top of that. Yeah, they lose 4 cents a day for that beautiful red uniform and 2 more cents a day for the food in their belly. How do you like that? They get to keep 2 cents. That's their 2 cents, folks. You can't make this stuff up. That's why we got to ask, what the heck's the deal with the red coat, right? I mean, come on. You want to stand out there in a big open field wearing a red coat, 2 white cross straps that basically say, shoot me here? No, nobody does, right? But let's remember that in the 18th century war was fought in a gentlemanly-like manner, right? Yeah, you stood toe-to-toe, squaring off against your opponent. You didn't hide behind trees or stone walls. things like that. That was not the European way. Even our officers were gentlemen, many of them having no formal military training at all. It was simply the purchase of a commission. The more money you were willing to spend, the higher the rank you could obtain in the military. You want to be a general? You can be a general. You just have to have the money to pay for it. That's all. So, now, these red coats also are cheaply made. I mean, after all, if you're the King of England and you're building yourself a spectacular army to go all over the world and make the world England, right? You've got to do it cost effectively. So, you hold in your possession Scotland. Okay, 75% of the world's wool's coming out of Scotland. Cheap, easy to obtain. There's my material. I also hold in my possession the crown jewel colony of India, right? So, over in India, there's this wild root that grows rampant. It's called the madder root. You harvest this root, you grind it up real fine, you throw it in a bucket with this chemical called alum, and a big old bucket of urine. Bam! You get that wonderful red color. One more reason to be a provincial, right? At least I know whose pee I'm wearing. All joking aside, think about it, folks. Today, we have synthetics and chemicals and such to get these vibrant colors dyed into the fabrics of our lives. But in the 18th century, we didn't have those. We had very coarse natural materials that many times would needed to be dyed over and over and over again to get the desired color, because there was no chemical with high acid and high ammonia contents, except for urine. And it's also cheap and easy to obtain, right? So, now, provincials like myself, we're going to end up with uniforms too. But Connecticut goes about this thing a whole different way than many of the other colonies. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, heck, even the Carolinas, they're all getting brand new uniforms. Head to toe, regimental coats, waistcoats, breeches, hats, everything, right? War hasn't even officially been declared yet. That doesn't happen until 1756. But Connecticut says, okay, boys, here's a knapsack, here's a blanket, have a nice day. Yep. In 1756, however, that will change. They will decide that a regimental coat should be had by each and every one of its soldiers. So therefore, rather than issue coats, they give money, 40 shillings to each one of these lads to get themselves a coat of their colonel's designation. The 1st Connecticut Regiment has a wonderful colonel. His name is Phineas Lyman, and he desires a coat that's red turned up in yellow. Okay, we will find blue coats turned up in red within our ranks because they are from the old establishment, which is the militia in the colony of Connecticut. Later in the war, you will see blue turned up in green, and this will pop up because of the shortage of red wool in Albany storehouses. The regulars get first dibs on any of the red wools, so provincials will have to deal with what they have. Now, you heard me mention about those young farm boys not really having the concept of what good hard currency was, right? Well, if I handed you 40 cents or 40 shillings, right, and I told you to go get yourself a 40 shilling coat, and you didn't really have that concept of what good hard money could actually do, you're probably going to want to save some of it, aren't you? You're going to go back home to your local tailor, your maker, and you're going to say, hey, I need a red coat turned up in yellow. But I'm only going to be there till October, okay? So it doesn't need to be anything fancy. Heck, it doesn't need to close over. The lapels can be sewn right down. And you know what? I've got wonderful deep pockets on my waistcoat. I don't even need functional pockets. Nope. And hey, skip the lining. Once again, I'll be home in October, pulling harvest. I don't need that stuff. It's going to come back to haunt many a young man as they find themselves stranded here at Fort William Henry throughout the winter months because a garrison is required to be here. If not enough volunteers step forth to man this post, there will be a draft. And depending upon the colony in which you came from, it will depend on how many people need to be pulled from said ranks. Let's keep in mind, although Connecticut on a piece of paper looks like a small little place, in the 18th century, it was considered a large colony. 29,000 men left that colony to fight this war. Okay, so many a young lad are going to be stuck here at Fort William Henry throughout the winter. if not here. Down from England, they come in different sizes, small, medium, and large, pasted together in a pile of fabric. It's our responsibility to tailor fit each and every soldier. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but we'll get it done. Now, with that being said, I'm going to get ready to turn you over to our dear Private Anderson here. He's that ranger guy I was telling you about. And if you look closely, even now, at the difference in our clothing, you notice I'm a regular soldier. I fight in a regular style. I do fight linear warfare when we step out on the battlefield as a provincial soldier. I am a member of a regiment of foot, where he is a irregular, right? His clothes are cut short, fit nice and tight to the body, so that not getting caught in the underbrush and such. Myself, I got long skirts and deep pockets. Yeah, deep pockets.
Exactly. Well, not as deep as mine.
So he thinks. Anyway.
Oh my God, what's that?
Yes, you won. I don't tell anybody about the cannon going off because I want to see who can get the most air. And that, you young lady, you won today.
Yeah.
They're all yours.
All right, do you want to move them or should we just stay right here? It's a good point of comparison.
If they're comfortable.
Provincials look.
You won, lady.
Folks, as the sergeant said, I am technically considered a provincial, but like he said, I am considered a specialist because I'm a ranger. Now, although, as the sergeant said, he is going to fight very similarly to the way the regulars fight, which, if you've ever seen movies like The Patriot, Last of the Mohicans, anything like that, you'll know that the Europeans, as he said, were
Mahirap
brightly
huminga, Bi. Tanggalin mo total na sa
clothing,
init naman.
that looks like basically a living target. And you're basically going to go out in the middle of an open field on flat land usually. And you're going to wait your turn like a gentleman to be shot in the chest, because that's the thing to do in the middle of the 18th century, right, folks? Now, as a ranger, do you think that I'm going to fight like that? No. Exactly. That's why the clothing informs the tactics, right? So I'm going to practice a style of warfare that the Marquis de Montcalm would refer to as la guerre sauvage. Does anyone here speak French? Know what that might mean? Also, oh, you're putting her on the spot. I see. La guerre means what? War, and sauvage sounds like? Exactly. They weren't exactly PC in the middle of the 18th century, folks. So yeah, literally means savage warfare. So fighting in the Native American style.
Talagang nagpaputok sila, no?
Tactics. Hit them hard, get out fast. So, let me give you a little bit of the history of the Rangers. Again, folks, if you're thinking of Power Rangers, when I say Rangers,
Parang
that's the
nasa
wrong
Back
type
to the
of Ranger.
Future tayo.
However, thinking of U.S. Army Rangers, I'm only pointing at you because of the t-shirts, then you are thinking along the right parameters, because we're basically the 18th century precursors of the modern day Rangers. Now, like I said, the history of the Rangers actually goes back before the middle of the 18th century, all the way back in the Middle Ages. In the 13th and 14th century, although we didn't actually use the term ranger to describe these men, back then they had a type of soldier called a scout bowman, kind of like a yeoman archer, if you're familiar with that. Think like Errol Flynn and Robin Hood, kind of wearing the green form-fitting clothes with a long hood over the top. These guys fought like rangers, and what they did in the British Isles, on the borders of Scotland and England and Wales, because you know how well the people in the British Isles get along with each other, right? Yeah, exactly. They would basically patrol the borders and make sure no one was coming over the border to try and invade in the middle of the night. Now, typically these men would just report back to their superiors what they saw, but could they fight? Yes, but remember, if they fought, they would usually fight in small groups, about 10 to 20. And again, use those hit-and-run tactics in order to make sure that they didn't have a high loss of men. Now, if we fast forward to the colonial period, in 1622, the first colonists to actually use the term range or ranging when referring to scouts and scouting was a man by the name of John Smith. Now, if you're going, oh yeah, the guy from Pocahontas, actually it's a different John Smith. He's a very common name at the time. And remember, this guy was in Plymouth Colony, not Jamestown, which is where John Smith from Pocahontas was from. Now, if we actually are talking about men who fought like I do, basically a hybrid of the European-style tactics at the time and the Native American tactics, and as well as the dress, that came about in the 1670s. Now, older folks in the audience may not have heard of this conflict. Younger folks, however, especially if you're in 8th grade U.S. history, you may have heard of this. It's a conflict in New England called King Philip's War. Who's ever heard of this before? Okay, that's quite common. Again, it's a very little-known colonial conflict. But, go figure, it involved a conflict with a Native American leader by the name of Philip, his real name actually was Metacoma. He was a Wampanoag. And he attacked the Plymouth colony, but also colonies and settlements in Connecticut and Rhode Island. It was a fairly large conflict. However, when the European forces that be, the colonial forces, go up against King Philip for the first time, they use a traditional European-style battle line, whereas the Native Americans are fighting with European firearms, but are using guerrilla tactics. So how folks, do you think this turned out for the colonials? Pretty poor, yeah, I was going to say exactly. It becomes apparent that the colonial powers need to essentially redesign their forces, again, to hybridize it with that native model. So the governor of Plymouth Colony essentially petitions a man by the name of Benjamin Church to go out, spend a little bit of time with Native Americans who were still allied with the colony, learn their ways, and again, adapt them to European tactics. That's exactly what he does. Now keep in mind, in the 1670s, the British were still wearing those lovely redcoats like you see, although slightly different in style. He keeps the redcoats, he keeps the waistcoats, the breeches, but the first thing that he does is he gives his men native-style gaiters, which are what I'm wearing right now. He also gives them soft-soled moccasins. Now think about this, folks. Soft-soled moccasins are excellent for scouting in the woods because they help silence your footfalls a little bit easier to maneuver without being detected compared to the hard-soled leather shoes like I'm wearing right now. He also gives his men a novel weapon, which is used by the Native Americans, and I bet you guys know what it is. It starts with a T. Tomahawk. Yeah, he gives them tomahawks. Now, of course, Benjamin Church, after implementing these tactics and these styles of clothing, novel concepts in combat like, cover, he starts to see a spike in his success rate. As a matter of fact, about by the end of the 1670s, King Philip was defeated. Now, Benjamin Church passes his teachings along to two other gentlemen by the name of John Lovewell and John Gorham. These both become very famous rangers in Canadian history. If any of you folks are from Nova Scotia, you might have heard of these guys before. But if you're not, again, you probably haven't heard of them. But John Gorham is operating in Nova Scotia between 1722 and 1748 throughout the duration of King George's War in the 1740s. And again, he sees an amazing success rate. But the most famous ranger of them all comes about in the French and Indian War. And you may have heard of this guy before, especially if you've seen the movie Northwest Passage with Spencer Tracy, or Turn, in which he's one of the chief villains. And this guy's name is Major Robert Rogers. Who's heard of him before? Interesting, I do get some audiences who have never seen it before. Now, Rogers is basically his own best PR man. This is how he becomes famous in the 1750s, and the Sergeant and I have a little bit that we like to do in terms of how Rogers actually went about basically, how should we say it, annoying his way up to the top. So if Rob is playing Sergeant Amherst, I'm Robert Rogers. This is basically what we did. Hey, General Amherst, I want to go on a raid to St. Francis. Can I have 2,000 men?
No.
1,800.
No.
16. 12.
No.
1,000.
Sundan ko siya.
No.
8?
No.
All right, 4. Final offer.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4? Are you sure about 4?
Yeah.
You're not going to nickel and dime me down to 2?
No.
Okay. That was basically how Rogers did business. Remember, it's like a kid asking for a cookie. If he asks enough times, he's going to annoy you so much that you're eventually going to give in. That's how he became famous in the 1750s. But his legacy was assured because he wrote down his 28 rules of ranging. He codified the tactics that were started by Benjamin Church.
Alright.
So, these tactics, believe it or not, are still used by the U.S. Army Rangers to this day, with some exceptions, of course. Not all the terms that apply to Native Americans exactly are relevant today, of course. But he does come up with such novel tactical things as, if your men are marching through the woods in a single narrow column, how about you stagger that line a little bit? Because think about this, folks. If I got shot at with a weapon like this at close quarters, that musket ball would have enough penetration power to go through me in the first row, and guess what? My buddy in the second and the third. Yes, my friend. Oh my God, yes. We're gonna shoot it off. Don't you worry. We'll get there. I got to talk about other ways that Rangers killed people before we get to this stuff, of course. Now, oh, don't worry, we'll get there. Now, he also comes up with another idea. Like he says, if you have more than 400 men in your column, how about you
Curious
split
yung
that sucker
bata
into three,
kanina
have
pa
some
nagtatanong.
flanks on the wings. In
Yeah,
which
that's
case,
good.
if a force attacks you from the front, you can surround them, kind of like that German World War II blitzkrieg maneuver. And if you get attacked from the back, you can basically do the same thing. Also, if you get attacked with, quote, as he says, overwhelming force,
Nani, is
have the
that
entire
real,
column
Sunny?
disperse, get some cover, and meet at a pre-designated rendezvous point. Now, all of you are probably going, yup, I've seen these tactics in like John Wayne, World War II.
John Wayne.
Well, yeah, guess what? He was a bit ahead of his time, this Robert
That
Rogers.
working, sabi.
So it isn't until World War II that these... For me to take a 12-inch spike and put it at the end of a 46-inch gun barrel, you see how that could go poorly? What could happen?
Stab the guy in front of you.
Oh, for sure that, but also I could just get it caught in the trees and trip, right? Exactly. As a matter of fact, the Rangers would usually saw down the length of this to about 38 inches, so it would be more like a carbine. But again, they usually fought at close quarters range. Rangers were already pretty good marksmen, so it didn't really do that much. But I wouldn't fight with a bayonet as a ranger, as I would say, but I do have some alternatives. As a matter of fact, according to Rogers' first rule of ranging, all rangers should be equipped with this. What is this, folks? And be careful.
Axe.
It's an axe for sure, but let's get more specific. It's not actually a tomahawk. There was a book that was written that has the same name as this. A hatchet, exactly. It's a hatchet. What's the difference, you're probably saying, right, between a tomahawk and a hatchet? Well, there isn't much of one. But a hatchet has multi-functionality, which is absolutely essential if you're a ranger. Think about this, folks. What was that? Thick brush? Oh, yeah, from like cutting down trees or poor people. Yeah, but a tomahawk, I was going to say, traditional axe blade style tomahawk. If you look at it, the blade would actually be a little bit narrower. Keep in mind, folks, that when we use this word tomahawk, you probably are thinking of something that looks very much like this. Huge amount of variety in tomahawks used by all of the Native American tribes across North America. The Iroquois used one that actually looked a little bit like a curved Irish shillelagh stick, more like an actual club. If you've ever seen the movie Last of the Mohicans, you see that big nasty looking thing that Chingachgook uses, which is called the gun stock tomahawk, which looks kind of like this with a big nasty spike coming out of it. All of those are considered tomahawks. But like I said, the axe blade one is narrower. Why? Well, a tomahawk only has one function, folks, and that's to kill another human being, usually through blunt force trauma to the head. This, multifunctional. Nice wide blade, like you said, means I can hack people more effectively or cut down trees, which is good because remember, rangers could be asked to construct makeshift breastworks or things like that. I also have this right here, folks. What's that?
Hammer.
A hammer. And case in point, I also have this little knock here. What do you suppose that's for?
Nail puller.
What was that?
Nail puller?
Yes, it's a nail puller, exactly. I was going to say, I'm glad somebody didn't say bottle opener, because remember, you didn't actually have bottles like that opened like that in the 18th century. But again, multifunctional tool, very, very useful for a ranger. Now, you folks to my right probably can see a little bit of this nasty weapon here, but you folks didn't. Now, folks, unlike the hatchet, this has a single purpose, and it's quite grisly. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what this was used for? Correct. You're going to say scalping, my friend? Well, you are correct. Yeah, this is a scalping knife. Remember, it's a bit too long to gut things, especially like gut fish. You would actually
Active yung bata.
this long. So yeah, this is a scalping knife. Now, scalping was a practice that was performed by the Rangers, but also by the French Corps de Bois, who are basically the equivalent of the Rangers on the French side,
Nakahula
and
na akong
Native
baterya.
Americans on both sides. Now, I know scalping is a little
Ganda
bit
pa
of a
naman
spicy
yung
subject.
tapat
Don't know why, though. Now, like I said, we've actually done our due diligence on the history of scalping here. It is something that developed in native cultures in the Americas, but also over in the old world in Europe, Asia, and Africa simultaneously. Of course, our sources that we look at in the old world go back further, meaning our written sources, and we do have, like, for example, accounts from the first millennium AD, Roman sources that describe the Scythians, who are nomadic horse people who took scalps. Also, the Dahomey women in Africa, who are the closest to actual Amazons we'll ever get to, also took scalps. But why? Why did they take scalps? Well, believe it or not, folks, they were headhunting cultures before that. But think about this. If I'm taking human heads as trophies, once I get to about 15 heads tied around the waistband, it's going to throw out my back a little bit, and I can't even imagine the stink. So why don't we just reduce it down to the top of the head? That was literally the thought process that went through that. We assume the Native Americans developed this practice along the same parameters, but I will say this much, folks. The monetization of scalping, or the payment for scalps, yeah, that was a purely European practice. So Robert Rogers was offering about £5 sterling for any enemy scalpers taken at the beginning of the French and Indian War, and by the end, he was offering about 20, which is about the same amount of pay that this guy gets every day. Now, consequently, William Shirley, who was the governor of Massachusetts, was offering up to £40 sterling per scalp. Now, I know you folks are going, yup, that's money all right. Don't know what it's worth, though. Well, we did the math for you, folks. Ready for this? £40 sterling in modern dollars US is $9,108. Why so much, right? Why so much? Well, think about this, folks. The population of the British colonies in 1755 was about 1.5 million people. New France, however, which was a territory that stretched from the St. Lawrence River all the way south to the Gulf of Mexico, only had 75,000 people. We outnumbered them about 18 or 20 to 1, depending on what year of the war we're talking about. So why so much for a scalp? You're incentivizing the fall of New France by doing that. Makes a bit more sense. What was that?
Making a
Yeah, exactly. This is also why the French, in particular, have such good PR relationships with the Native Americans. That's why they have 36 tribes allied with them, because they need that manpower in order to be effective, whereas the Brits, they only really have 2, give or take. Now, that's all well and jolly, right, folks? But you guys really want to talk about this guy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot over here, because I'm actually going to load and fire this thing. But I don't want to do it in such close quarters, especially with you guys flanking me on the sides. So we are turning into the sun a little bit, and I do apologize about that. But I'll try to stand right over here. Everybody see okay? All right. Now, if you want to pivot, go for it. Now, obviously this is a gun, right, folks? But let's get a bit more specific. It's a type of gun. Does anyone know what type of gun it is? Yes, my friend. It's good. It's a musket, not a rifle, because a rifle would have rifle in the barrel. This is smoothbore. Now, do you know what type of musket
Babae pala
it is?
yun.
This firing mechanism.
Ano yung British?
What was that? That's correct, but there's a more specific type. Like I said, based on the locking mechanism, not the stuff that I actually use to fire. So, locking mechanism. What was that? Nope. There's a flint here. So
Pin.
it's a flint.
Pin.
Flint
Ano yun?
lock. Because remember, lock is the
Pin.
mechanism.
Ano?
So it's a flintlock musket.
Ano ka
Getting more specific,
Pin?
the actual name of this, the British version, is called the Brown Bess. Now, why do we call it a Brown Bess? Well, a lot of young folk will actually look at this thing and go, well, the stock is brown. Yeah, that's true, but there's another reason it's called brown, folks. If you look at this barrel, it's nice and shiny right now. When this was actually issued to British soldiers, it was acid wash, so it turned this kind of rusty brown color. Now think about this, for me as a ranger, having this be a rusty brown color that's not shiny is advantageous. Why?
Doesn't shine.
Yeah, it doesn't give away my position, right? It's like those people who look at pictures of themselves wearing like those gold wristwatches in Vietnam and are like, I'm amazed that I didn't get shot because that gives away your, for real. I was, right? Now, I like to walk through the oh, excuse me, that's why it's called brown. I didn't tell you why it's called Bess though. Now some historians assume it's named Bess after Queen Elizabeth I of England, who was queen about 150 years before the French and Indian War. But folks, I can tell you there's probably another reason it's called Bess. It's a little dirty though. There are kids here. Should I tell you? Bess was a nickname in the 18th century for a lady of the night.
A lady
You
of the
follow
night.
me, folks?
When a soldier goes on guard duty, he does a dancing with Bess.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I think the Brits were being a little bit tongue-in-cheek with the naming of this weapon. It would be like an Australian named it a brown Sheila or something like that, if you get my drift. Now, like I said, I like to walk people through how to fire this using a series of modern-day idioms we actually get from it. Looking at the components, I'm sure you all get this one.